A little puppy wouldn't stop following a police officer through the streets, his tiny paws stumbling but determined. At first, the officer thought it was just a stray searching for food, until he discovered the heartbreaking truth. What the puppy was trying to show him left the officer in tears and changed both their lives forever. The late afternoon sun slanted across the quiet street, washing the sidewalks in fading gold. Officer Daniel Hayes adjusted his cap, stretching his shoulders after another long shift. The city was never truly quiet. Sirens, traffic, and endless calls kept him running. But in this moment, at least, he allowed himself a breath. He didn't know that this ordinary evening would be the beginning of something that would shake his heart more than any case he had ever worked. He first noticed it as a faint sound, soft, quick little paws clicking against the pavement. When he turned, he saw him. A tiny puppy, no more than a few months old, trotting behind him with determination that seemed far too strong for such a fragile body. His fur was dusty, patchy in places, his ribs faintly visible beneath his skin. Yet his eyes, those dark, liquid eyes, were locked on Daniel as though he were the only lifeline left in the world. "Hey, buddy," Daniel muttered, half smiling despite himself. He crouched down, extending a gloved hand. The puppy froze, then inched closer, sniffing cautiously. But just as Daniel thought he'd run away, the pup pressed his little head against the officer's boot, trembling. Something inside Daniel shifted. He had seen countless strays before, dogs wandering alleys, animals abandoned without a second thought. Most of them ran from people. But this one, he wasn't running. He was following, pleading. Daniel sighed, straightening. "I can't take you with me, little guy," he whispered. He began walking again, faster this time. But the puppy broke into a wobbly run, nails scraping against the concrete, refusing to be left behind. By the time Daniel reached his patrol car, the pup was still there, panting, exhausted, yet unwilling to stop. Daniel opened the driver's side door, but before climbing in, he crouched again, eyeing the small creature. "What do you want from me, huh?" he murmured. "Food? Shelter?" The puppy whined, a thin, pitiful sound that cut straight into Daniel's chest. He knew he couldn't ignore it. Still, his mind wrestled with rules and practicality. Officers weren't supposed to take strays into patrol cars. There were shelters for that. Yet when he reached for his radio, preparing to call animal control, the puppy suddenly let out a desperate bark. Not the playful kind, not the sharp warning of a bigger dog, but a broken sound that seemed to beg, "Please, don't leave me." Daniel froze. His finger hovered over the button, but he lowered the radio slowly. "All right," he muttered, opening the back door. "Fine. Just for tonight." The puppy jumped clumsily into the seat, curling up instantly as though he had finally found safety. Daniel sat in the front, staring at the rearview mirror. That tiny bundle of fur looked smaller than ever against the dark fabric of the car. He should have felt in control, like he always did when making quick decisions on duty. Instead, he felt unsettled. Driving toward the station, he kept glancing back. Every time, the pup's eyes were there, wide and unblinking, locked on him like a shadow unwilling to let go. At the station, Daniel carried the puppy inside, drawing a few amused comments from fellow officers. "Didn't know you were adopting strays now, Hayes," one teased. But Daniel barely heard them. Something told him this wasn't just a stray. Something deeper was hiding in the puppy's persistence. He found an old blanket, set it on the floor of his office, and placed the puppy down. The pup circled once before collapsing into the fabric, letting out a soft sigh. Daniel should have felt relief. Instead, he felt the heaviness of unanswered questions. Why had this little one chosen him? Why follow him and no one else? As the building quieted, Daniel leaned back in his chair, eyes on the tiny creature. He tried to convince himself this was temporary. Tomorrow, he'd hand the pup over to the proper shelter. Yet as the puppy twitched in sleep, whimpering softly like he was still running from something in his dreams, Daniel's chest tightened. He didn't know the truth yet. Didn't know the storm of pain hidden behind those innocent eyes. But soon he would. And when he did, it would break him in ways he never imagined. The next morning, Officer Daniel arrived at the precinct earlier than usual. His mind had been restless all night, haunted by the image of that tiny puppy chasing him, stumbling, yet refusing to give up. He had seen many difficult things in his career: families torn apart, lives shattered, people crying for justice. But the raw desperation in that little pup's eyes was something entirely different. It wasn't just fear, it was as if the puppy had a message, a story it desperately wanted him to understand. As he parked his patrol car, Daniel glanced around instinctively, half expecting to see the scruffy figure again. And there it was. Across the street, near the edge of the alley, the same puppy stood. Its tail wagged faintly when their eyes met, but there was no joy in the movement, only hope mixed with exhaustion. Daniel sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "What do you want from me, little one?" He walked across the street, slow and deliberate, as if not to scare it away. The puppy didn't run this time. Instead, it trotted forward and sat directly in front of his boots. Looking up with wide, glassy eyes, it let out a faint whine and placed one tiny paw against his shoe. Something inside Daniel cracked. He crouched down, studying the pup more closely. Its fur was dull, patches missing as though it had been scratching from fleas or worse. Its ribs were clearly visible, each shallow breath making them shift beneath its skin. But it wasn't just neglect, it was urgency. The way the puppy whined and then immediately turned back toward the alley made Daniel realize this wasn't about food alone. "You want me to follow you, huh?" Daniel muttered softly, voice low as if talking to a child. The puppy yipped faintly and took a few steps, then turned back to check if he was coming. Daniel hesitated. He had paperwork, a briefing, and a full shift ahead. But something about this felt different. He wasn't just looking at an abandoned pup. He was looking at a soul begging for help, trying desperately to lead him somewhere. Finally, he exhaled and stood. "All right, little one. Show me." The pup's ears perked up, and it began trotting toward the alley, stopping every few feet to glance back. Daniel followed, his boots crunching softly against the gravel. The alley was narrow, damp, and carried the faint odor of decay. Sunlight barely reached between the leaning buildings. At first, Daniel saw nothing out of the ordinary: trash bins, broken bottles, graffiti sprayed across the cracked walls. But then the pup darted behind an abandoned dumpster, its whines growing louder, sharper. Daniel quickened his pace and crouched again, peering behind. What he saw made his chest tighten. There, huddled in a cardboard box lined with scraps of filthy rags, were two more puppies, smaller, weaker, and barely moving. Their eyes were half shut, their tiny bodies trembling with every labored breath. One gave a faint squeak, then fell still, its strength nearly gone. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Oh God!" The little pup looked at him, whining louder now, as if begging, "See? This is why I came. This is why I followed you." For a moment, the officer couldn't move. His training had taught him to deal with emergencies, injured people, crime scenes, disasters, but nothing prepared him for this silent plea from creatures so fragile, so innocent. He reached into the box carefully, lifting one tiny body in his large hands. It was limp but still warm. Its fur was sticky with dirt, and its breathing was faint but present. The other stirred weakly, barely able to lift its head. Daniel set them down gently, his jaw tightening. Anger and sorrow swirled inside him. Someone had left them here to die. Someone had walked away from helpless lives, discarding them like trash. He looked at the first puppy, the one who had followed him since yesterday. Suddenly, everything made sense. It hadn't been chasing him for food or attention. It had been leading him here, fighting with every ounce of its tiny body to bring him to its siblings. You, you were asking me to save them," Daniel whispered, his voice breaking. The puppy whimpered softly, curling itself around the box as though shielding its siblings from harm. Daniel stood, pulling out his radio, his voice steady but tight. "This is Officer Daniels. I need immediate assistance at 7th and Alder, behind the old factory lot. I've got an abandonment case, 3 puppies, critical condition." Static crackled, then a voice responded, "Copy that, Daniels. Sending animal control and a unit your way." He ended the call, his eyes never leaving the frail bodies in front of him. His heart felt heavy, but at the same time, a strange fire had lit within him. These little lives had been hidden in the shadows, overlooked by everyone, except for their brave sibling, who refused to give up. Kneeling once more, Daniel gently stroked the head of the loyal pup who had found him. "You did good, little one. You saved them." The pup wagged its tail weakly and licked his hand, as if relieved that someone finally understood. Daniel blinked hard, his eyes burning. He had promised himself long ago that he wouldn't let emotions cloud his duty, but right here, behind a forgotten dumpster, 3 fragile lives had broken through every wall he had built. And as he gathered the box carefully in his arms, the loyal pup trotting close at his heels, he realized this was no longer just a case. It was a responsibility. It was a call for help that only his heart could answer. The following morning was gray and heavy, the kind of sky that pressed down on the earth with a silent weight. Officer Daniel hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the little puppy's desperate eyes staring up at him, pleading for something he still couldn't quite understand. When he arrived at the station, the puppy was already there, waiting by the entrance as if he had never left. The moment Daniel's boots touched the concrete, the tiny dog bolted forward, tail wagging furiously, ears perked, eyes bright with hope. "Buddy, you're here again," Daniel whispered, bending down. The puppy leapt against his chest, licking his chin with a frantic urgency. The other officers laughed and shook their heads, but Daniel didn't care. Something in his chest tightened again. This was no random encounter. That day, Daniel had paperwork to do, but the puppy refused to stay away. He lay curled up beneath Daniel's desk, his little chest rising and falling steadily, as though being near him was the only safe place in the world. Each time Daniel moved, the puppy's head popped up instantly, following his every step. By mid-afternoon, Daniel decided he couldn't ignore the gnawing thought any longer. There had to be a reason this little soul was so determined to find him, to stick by his side. So when his shift ended, Daniel scooped the puppy into his arms. "All right, little guy. Show me. Show me what you've been trying to tell me." He set the puppy down outside the station. At once, the pup darted ahead, nose low, ears pricked, glancing back to make sure Daniel followed. Step by step, Daniel trailed him, through alleyways, down broken sidewalks, across quiet streets. The little tail wagged furiously whenever Daniel stayed close, but slowed whenever he lagged behind, as though begging him not to give up. The walk stretched on for blocks until the buildings grew older, their paint chipped, windows cracked. The puppy turned down a narrow lane, stopped in front of a rusted gate, and let out the softest whine. Daniel's chest grew tight. He pushed the gate open. Inside was a yard overrun with weeds, and at the far end stood a collapsing shack. The puppy sprinted ahead and pawed at the door, barking high-pitched yelps that spoke of urgency. Daniel approached cautiously. The smell hit him first, damp, rot, and something sharper, something that made his throat close. He pressed his hand against the door, and it swung inward with a groan. Inside, the dim light revealed shadows moving. No, not shadows. Dogs. Half a dozen of them, their ribs jutting out, their eyes sunken, chained to rusted pipes along the walls. Their fur was matted, their whimpers weak. Some lifted their heads at the sight of Daniel, others didn't have the strength. Daniel froze, his heart slamming against his ribs. This was what the puppy had been trying to tell him. "Oh my God," he whispered. The little pup darted inside and pressed against one of the dogs, a larger shepherd, barely clinging to life. The pup licked its muzzle, whining softly, nudging it to move. But the shepherd barely stirred. Tears burned Daniel's eyes. His chest ached as the truth sank in. The puppy wasn't just seeking affection. He wasn't lost. He wasn't confused. He had been desperately searching for someone strong enough to save his family. Daniel's hands shook as he reached for his radio. His voice cracked as he called it in. "Dispatch. I need backup and animal rescue at 1432 Willow Lane. Multiple dogs. Condition critical." The puppy pressed close to the shepherd again, as though reassuring him. "Help has come. I found him." Daniel fell to his knees in the middle of the shack, overwhelmed. He reached for the little pup, pulling him into his arms, burying his face against the matted fur. His tears wet the dog's coat as he whispered, broken, "You were never asking for help for yourself. You were begging me to save them. God, I didn't see it. I'm so sorry. The pup squirmed, licking away his tears. Daniel's heart shattered and rebuilt all at once. He finally understood. Within minutes, sirens wailed outside. Officers poured in, followed by rescue vans. The team spread out, clipping chains, carrying frail dogs into waiting vehicles, wrapping them in blankets. The air filled with frantic movement, yet Daniel barely moved, clutching the puppy, feeling his tiny heart beat against his chest. As the last dog was carried out, Daniel rose, the pup still in his arms. He glanced back at the crumbling shack one final time. The darkness inside seemed to recede as the rescued dogs left, one by one. The little puppy looked up at him then, eyes shining with something far deeper than relief, trust. And in that moment, Daniel knew his life had just changed forever. Daniel sat in his patrol car long after his shift had technically ended, the little puppy curled against his chest, eyes closed in peaceful exhaustion. The station had grown quieter as most of the officers left, but he couldn't bring himself to go home just yet. His mind churned with questions, every detail of the puppy's behavior replaying in his head. Why had this tiny creature chosen him? Why the desperation, the persistence, the refusal to leave his side? And most haunting of all, why had the puppy led him to that broken-down house in the woods, to the sound of faint whimpers coming from underneath? Daniel sighed, resting his chin lightly against the puppy's soft fur. "What are you trying to tell me, little guy?" he whispered. The words echoed in the stillness, and though the pup didn't answer, Daniel felt the same quiet tug in his heart. The next morning, Daniel returned to the old house with backup. The air smelled of damp wood and decay, and a single loose shutter banged against the wall with each gust of wind. His flashlight beam cut across the dark corners inside, empty beer bottles, broken furniture, mold climbing up the walls. But in the basement, his partner Officer Ruiz discovered something chilling. Old cages, rusted chains, a cracked food bowl still lying on its side. The sight made Daniel's stomach knot. "This wasn't just an abandoned place," Ruiz muttered. "Someone was keeping animals here. Dogs, by the look of it." Daniel's heart dropped. He crouched down, noticing scratch marks along the wooden beams, desperate clawing etched into the surface. The puppy, tucked safely in his arms, whimpered softly as though recognizing the scent, the memories. Daniel rubbed his small head gently. "This is where you came from, isn't it?" The thought was unbearable, yet everything suddenly made sense. The fear, the hunger, the way the pup had begged for help. Somehow, the little one had survived whatever nightmare had unfolded here. But more than that, he had wanted Daniel to find it. For the next few days, Daniel worked tirelessly with animal control. Together, they searched the area and followed leads. They discovered that the house had once belonged to a man known for shady dealings, suspected of breeding and selling dogs illegally. He had vanished months earlier, leaving behind traces of his cruelty. And yet, in the wreckage, Daniel kept circling back to one fact: the puppy had led him there, as though guiding him to uncover a truth no one else had seen. One evening, after long hours of paperwork and reports, Daniel finally drove home with the puppy beside him in a blanket. The little guy was stronger now, eating well, his eyes brighter, his tiny tail wagging when Daniel spoke. But every now and then, the pup would look at him with that same soulful gaze, almost as if saying, "Don't forget. Don't stop searching." Daniel sat down at his kitchen table, the puppy perched on his lap. He stared into those eyes and spoke aloud, his voice thick with emotion. "You weren't just asking for food or shelter, were you? You wanted someone to see what happened to you to all of them." His throat tightened. Memories from his own childhood flickered to life. The times he had felt helpless, watching things he couldn't change, silently praying someone would notice. And no one ever had. But this time was different. This time, he was the one who noticed. The next breakthrough came unexpectedly. A neighbor living near the old house contacted Daniel, shaken after seeing his report in the local paper. She recalled hearing barking for weeks before the man disappeared, sometimes frantic, sometimes fading into silence. And then, one night, nothing. Daniel felt his chest ache. The puppy must have been the last one left, the only survivor. Somehow, against all odds, he had escaped and wandered until fate brought him to Daniel's patrol car. The thought broke him. He excused himself, stepping outside into the cool night air with the puppy pressed against his uniform. Tears stung his eyes, raw and unhidden this time. "You were trying to save them," he whispered hoarsely. "And when you couldn't, you found me." The puppy nuzzled his chin gently, as if offering comfort. From that night on, Daniel's mission became clear. He wasn't just caring for a stray anymore. He was honoring the unspoken plea the pup had carried in his tiny frame. Together, they would ensure the cruelty uncovered in that basement was never repeated. The little survivor had chosen him for a reason, and Daniel vowed he would never let him down. But even as he whispered this promise, a question lingered. Why him? Out of all the officers, all the people the puppy might have crossed paths with, why had he latched onto Daniel so fiercely, refusing to leave his side? The answer, Daniel sensed, lay deeper still, waiting to be uncovered. And when he finally learned it, his world would never be the same. The next morning dawned gray and heavy, clouds pressing low as if mirroring the mood hanging over Officer Daniels. He hadn't slept much. Images of Max's desperate eyes kept him awake, paired with the gut-wrenching thought of what might have happened to the puppy's family. Still, when the alarm buzzed, Daniels was already half awake, sitting on the edge of the bed with Max curled against his feet, as if sensing his every thought. The station was buzzing with chatter when he walked in, Max trotting confidently by his side. Some officers chuckled softly at the sight of the small puppy strutting through the precinct like he owned it, but Daniels didn't care. Max wasn't just a puppy now. He was a partner, a symbol of something deeper that no one else could yet understand. Lieutenant Harris caught sight of them and raised an eyebrow. "So, the little shadow is back again, huh? Guess you've got a new recruit, Daniels." Daniels smiled faintly, but said nothing. Harris didn't need to know that Max had led him to a dark discovery the day before. He wanted more proof before making accusations. By mid-morning, Daniels was out on patrol. Max settled beside him in the passenger seat of the cruiser. He noticed something unusual. Whenever they drove near a certain cluster of rundown warehouses, Max would grow restless, whining softly and pressing his nose against the window. At first, Daniels thought nothing of it, but after the third pass, it felt deliberate. Finally, he pulled over, parking near the edge of the lot. "All right, buddy," Daniels murmured, clipping the leash to Max's collar. "Show me." The puppy wasted no time. He darted forward, pulling Daniels with surprising strength for his small size. They wove between the rusted skeletons of abandoned buildings until Max stopped abruptly in front of a heavy metal door. His little body stiffened, ears perked, and then a soft whimper broke from his throat. Daniels crouched down beside him, running a hand over his trembling back. "This is it, isn't it? This is what you've been trying to tell me." With his heart pounding, Daniels tried the door. It was locked. But there were fresh boot prints in the dirt nearby, and faint sounds echoed from inside. He called for backup immediately, every nerve in his body sparking with tension. Within minutes, 2 other units arrived, weapons drawn. They pried the door open and stormed in. What they found froze Daniels in his tracks. Inside were several filthy cages, the kind used for animals, too small, too cruel. Whimpers and faint scratching came from within. Daniels rushed forward, his stomach turning at the sight. Puppies. Half-starved, trembling, their eyes wide with terror. The stench was unbearable, the air heavy with neglect and suffering. Max barked frantically, pulling against the leash until Daniels let him go. The little pup ran straight to one of the cages, pawing at the bars. Inside was a pup that looked nearly identical to him. Same eyes, same markings. His sibling. Daniel's throat closed up. He felt hot tears blur his vision as the reality sank in. Max hadn't just been searching for help. He had been searching for family. The officers worked quickly, unlocking cages and lifting the fragile bodies of the surviving puppies out one by one. Some were too weak to stand. Others whimpered as they were cradled. Daniels held Max close, his free arms supporting the pup from the cage that Max wouldn't leave behind. "You brought me here, didn't you?" Daniels whispered hoarsely, kissing the top of Max's head. "You never gave up. You saved them." The raid confirmed everything. An illegal puppy mill had been operating right under their noses, and Max had been the key to uncovering it. Back at the station, As animal control and rescue workers took over, Daniel sat on the curb outside, Max and his sibling pressed into his lap. His fellow officers gave him space, recognizing the weight of the moment. He wasn't just holding two puppies. He was holding the fragile threads of survival, love, and the unspoken trust between a broken animal and a man who never expected to feel this way again. For the first time in years, Daniels didn't feel hollow inside. He felt alive, and he owed it all to a little puppy who wouldn't stop following him, no matter how many times he tried to walk away. But deep down, he knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The morning light painted soft gold across the police station as Officer Daniels stood in the courtyard, his uniform neatly pressed but his heart beating with a nervous rhythm. Just a week ago, this place had been filled with the cries of a trembling puppy desperate for help. Now, that same puppy, named Chance, stood proudly beside him, tail wagging, eyes shining, no longer broken but brimming with trust. Today was no ordinary day. The station had prepared something extraordinary, not just for Chance but for Daniels as well. Word had spread quickly about the little German shepherd puppy who had followed an officer through pouring rain and refused to give up. Local news outlets had shared the story, and the town had fallen in love with Chance. People sent letters, food, and blankets for him. Some even wrote about how his courage gave them hope in their own struggles. But for Daniels, none of it compared to the quiet, personal moments he had shared with the puppy. Nights sitting awake as Chance whimpered from nightmares. Mornings when the pup crawled into his lap as if to say, "Thank you for seeing me." Each small act had carved a bond deeper than Daniels ever imagined possible. As the courtyard filled with his fellow officers, Daniels knelt down and adjusted the small blue collar around Chance's neck. His hand lingered there, steadying himself. "Ready for this, buddy?" he whispered. Chance let out a sharp bark, as if answering, and nuzzled against his chest. The police chief stepped forward, holding a certificate in his hand. "Today," the chief began, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd, "we honor a story of resilience, loyalty, and the bond between man and dog. A small puppy, abandoned and left to suffer, found his way into the life of one of our own. And in doing so, reminded us all what it means to never give up." Daniels swallowed hard as the chief turned toward him. "Officer Daniels, for your compassion and for opening your heart, we recognize Chance as an honorary member of our K-9 family." A cheer rippled through the officers, and Chance barked again, his tail wagging furiously. Daniels felt tears sting his eyes as the chief handed him a small tag engraved with the word Chance. It wasn't official police gear, it wasn't about duty. It was about belonging. The moment broke him. Right there, in front of his brothers and sisters in uniform, Officer Daniels lowered his head and wept. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming weight of gratitude, love, and healing. For years, he had carried his own silent wounds, the kind no one else could see. And somehow, a fragile puppy had found him in the rain and said without words, "You're not alone anymore." As he stood again, Chance pressed against his leg. Daniels looked out at the crowd and then down at the puppy who had changed everything. His voice cracked as he spoke. "I thought I was saving him, but the truth is, he saved me." The courtyard went quiet, moved by the rawness of his confession. Several officers wiped their eyes discreetly, but no one looked away. Because they all understood. This wasn't just about a dog. It was about the kind of bond that could restore broken hearts. After the ceremony, Daniels clipped the new tag onto Chance's collar. The pup pawed at it curiously, then licked Daniels' hand as if giving his seal of approval. Together, they walked out of the station, the sun warming their backs. Life moved forward, but it was never the same again. Chance grew stronger each day, his limp fading, his trust blossoming. Daniels brought him everywhere: patrols, community events, even school visits where children gathered around to hear the story of the brave little puppy who asked a policeman for help. Chance would sit proudly, ears perked, soaking in the love and pats. At night, Daniels would sometimes sit on his porch, Chance curled against him, and think back to that first desperate moment when tiny paws splashed through puddles to reach him. It was a memory he'd never forget, the beginning of everything. Years later, people in town still remembered the story. They'd stop Daniels on the street, smile at the dog by his side, and say, "That's Chance, isn't it? The miracle pup?" And Daniels would always smile, scratching behind Chance's ears, and reply softly, "Yeah, that's him. My partner. My family." Because in the end, the little puppy who once begged for help had found something far greater. He had found home. And in that home, both he and Daniels had healed. The officer no longer carried his pain alone. And the puppy who had once been unwanted now lived each day knowing he was loved beyond measure. And so their story wasn't just one of rescue. It was one of redemption. Two souls, broken in different ways, had crossed paths in a storm. And together, they had built something unbreakable. A bond. A promise. A life worth living. And that, more than anything, was the miracle.